Okay, so I'll introduce myself. I'm Cameron. I'm a senior zoology major with a scuba diving minor. Today I'm going to be talking about carnivorous plants and the different attributes they have acquired throughout evolution and different kinds of trapping mechanisms and different kinds of defenses. To start off, what a carnivorous plant is. First off, the history of carnivorous plants. Charles Darwin was the first person to ever discover a carnivorous plant. On his voyage, he discovered the Venus flytrap in South America, and he described it as one of the most fascinating things within an ecosystem. They are extremely fascinating, and they have a very wide variety of different evolutionary attributes. Then there was a kind of a debate of what is a carnivorous plant, because a lot of plants species can kill or harm animals. And that was a big controversy of what was considered one. But in the 1900s, it was finalized that what a carnivorous plant is that it's a plant that gains nutrients from trapping, digesting animals or protozoa, which they typically ingest. So these are flowering plants. They have specially designed leaves that can trap their prey and many different mechanisms that they can do with that. There are 5 different trapping mechanisms that carnivorous plants have, and these are snap traps, adhesive traps, suction traps, pitcher traps, and eel traps. These plants generally live in very low nutrient environment and close to the forest floors of many species. A lot of them live in South and Central America. A lot of these carnivorous plant species don't have very big leaves, so they don't photosynthesize as much, and which is why they have to trap and eat their animals. There we go. So there's several different kinds of carnivorous plants. Like I said, there's like hundreds of species. Here's a snap trap, which is a Venus flytrap. Here's a adhesive trap. Here's a sucker trap. Here's an eel trap, and here's a pitcher trap. So there are 2 different kinds. So this is a passive section, which are the eel traps and the pitcher traps. And the active plants are the snap traps, adhesive traps, and the sucker traps. And there's just a few of the different kinds of species that are within the hundreds of different kinds of carnivorous plants. So to start off, I'm going to talk about snap traps. In this group, I mainly talked about Venus flytrap and Aldrovenda visculosa. These are only 2. There's several other ones, but both of these, so the Venus flytrap is like the on land kind of version of the Aldroverde, and they basically essentially work the same way, is that they have these hairs, which is where the arrows are pointing, and once the hairs are triggered, they snap shut. And once they snap shut, they slowly close tighter while the prey is being digested by the acids and then essentially drank by the plant to gain the nutrients. And then, so these plants are the fastest moving plants like ever. There hasn't been a study shown that there's any other fast plants than snap trap. Snap trap plants are very quick in that once the snap is triggered, it's like milliseconds of closure. The bright colors on the inside of the Venus flytraps are what mainly attracts insects or animals to go to try to eat the nectar from the insides. And then once the hairs are triggered, it shuts. And it's kind of interesting because once the trap is shut, that's what the leaves on the top here, they kind of act like jail cell bars, and they close. So while the plant is closing tighter and tighter, those are act as like jail cell bars, not allowing the animal to escape. So next one I'm going to talk to you about is the adhesive plant traps. These plants are typically very thin leaves, but with a ton of sticky glands that the animal can't get off of once they've gotten themselves stuck. Now, according to this article, the traps themselves with a carbohydrate-rich adhesive, and then it digests them with enzymes made by sessile glands. And as you can see in the upper right-hand corner, that picture, it wraps around it, so that's how it allows the sessile glands to digest the animal and, again, gain the nutrients. And the red arrow is pointing to the sticky glands that are made out of that carbohydrate. This article was actually really interesting, and I want to share some of the results with you. So if you look on this picture here, you can see the very left picture in A. It's an insect that got stuck to one of these plants. The middle plant is the actual plant and has all the sticky carbohydrate glands, but the one on the right is actually just some wiring, and it has like sticky substance on it, and they were trying to figure out like best times of day and what attracts insects and all that stuff. Well, they found that the actual plant, not the mimic plant, gains a lot more insects in the day than at night, and it almost doubles, if not triples, the amount of insects that it captures over the false plant, which I found very interesting. That it must, because they couldn't find like a pheromone or something that was being emitted, but somehow the insects were still attracted to this plant versus just the wiring and the sticky substance. So the next one I'm going to talk to you about is a sucker plant trap. So these are very interesting to me too. And the way of obtaining their prey is that the plant is, then the main plant I'm going to be talking about is the baldwort plant. But so according to this article, this plant lives in water, which I also found really interesting, that carnivorous plants live in water. I didn't, think of that, but they do. And they live in this water, and there's a protein that makes the plant squeeze out all the water inside of it. Then once these little hairs, again, there's like all the top picture with the red arrows, all those little hairs up there. Once those are triggered, the plant opens back up, which makes a sucking motion, and all that water and whatever is by those hairs gets sucked into the trap. And then that animal gets stuck within the trap, and then it digests the animal once it's in the trap. And then once it's fully digested, the protein closes it again to squeeze out all the water to prepare it to trap again. Then I'm going to talk about the pitcher plant. This is a passive plant trap. The eel plants are very similar to pitcher plants. They practically consume in the same way. Eel plants are just much longer and narrower, as opposed to pitcher plants kind of have like a big bulb at the end, or more bulbous. These plants capture their prey when they fall into the pit of water. So you can see how it's just a long, big pit on the right-hand corner, and then the bottom corner with the picture, you can see all the water in there. According to this article, the prey is attracted to the plant by the visual cues, and then the plant lures the animal into the pit with nectar. So in the top picture, you can see that there's a leaf, and under that leaf is where the nectar is. And it only gets secreted there. But around the brim of the entire plant is very slick and slippery. So when the animal tries to reach for that nectar, it slips and falls into the pitcher plant. And then there's teeth on the inside that don't allow the insect to crawl back up outside of the water, and it gets just stuck inside the water. And it is a mixture of rainwater and enzymes that the plant produces. So the rainwater has bacteria in it, and the plant produces these enzymes, which then dissolves the animal and allows the plant to like drink it almost again and gain its nutrients in that way. So there's several ways that plants consume their prey, and most of them it's just by digestion. It just dissolves their prey in some sort of acid or enzyme. And again, with the pitcher plant, it drowns their prey and then turns it into a liquid substance. And to the right picture, you can see the pitcher plant cut in half, and that brown thing, it's a digestive gland that produces the acids, and that's what gets produced with the rainwater to dissolve the prey, and then it allows it to drink the prey. And then to the left is the adhesive plant, which it curls around that insect, puts it almost in this like carbohydrate bubble, and then kills it, and then it turns it into like a soup again, and again gains the nutrients that way. So carnivorous plants still need to defend themselves though, and so carnivorous plants are just like all other plants in the sense that they use jasmonate and salicylic acid to defend themselves. So according to this article, the salicylic acid protects the plant from biotrophic pathogens, and the jasmonate protects them from herbivory and neurotrophic pathogens. These kinds of plant also use secondary metabolites to defend themselves from funguses, microbes, diseases, and cancer. And the name of this metabolite is plumbagin. Insects have kind of adapted to carnivorous plants, but carnivorous plants have evolved very well to make sure that their prey cannot get out. So these plants have evolved so much that they typically, once the animal has triggered the plant or has fallen into its pit, it's more than likely going to die or be eaten. Like I said earlier, the Venus flytrap has jail cell bars on it so that the animal cannot get out. The pitcher plants have that teeth underneath and the slippery brims so that the animal can't crawl back out but slips in. There are some insects that have been known to feed on these plants, and these are caterpillars, weevils, mites, and several other insects that sit under the under part of the capturing part of the mechanism of the plant and eat their leaves and stuff like that, where the plant can't get to them and they can't get to the capturing part. So this is another big problem that carnivorous plants had to face, which was getting pollinated, because a lot of them kill or eat their pollinators. So to get pollinated, because they eat their pollinators, they've evolved to make sure that they don't. So according to BBC Earth, a lot of carnivorous plants have evolved to have their flowers grow away from the traps so the animal doesn't get too close to the traps. So the two red arrows indicate, so the bottom red arrow is the actual tram, and this is a sundew plant. And down here is where the capturing mechanism is, and the bottom arrow, but all the way at the top is where the flower is. So it's that really long stem that makes sure that the pollinator doesn't get anywhere near the trapping mechanism of the plant. And pitcher plants, since they don't have that way of capturing, it's just falling into a pit, they have found that pitcher plants actually close the capturing mechanism or the pitcher while the flower's in bloom. Then once the flower is done being in bloom, it reopens up its pitcher to allow for it to gain nutrients and eat their prey. And that is all I have for you. Are there any questions?
Awesome.
Yeah. Question.
Yeah.
When I'm taking botany, one of the things they talk about these carnivorous plants is the amount of activation energy required to for the plant to close, as well as how much pressure is involved. Did you look into that at all? Like how much the pressure the fly maybe has to put onto the plant before it activates and closes on it?
Yeah. It basically, for some plants, it is just whatever brushes by it, it will trigger it. Certain plants do need a harder brush by. So a lot of plants, like the Venus flytrap, wind could potentially close it, but they have evolved so that it needs an actual push down of a certain pressure to activate it, so that it can't just be closed by wind and then waste all that energy that it used to reopen.
Yeah. Yeah, because the issue becomes it's a waste of energy for it to close if it has the slightest brush by. So yeah. I was wondering, so you said some actually will waste that energy?
Yeah, it just some have not evolved as far as other ones, so some haven't gotten to that point of that it doesn't know the difference yet, but certain ones have evolved so far that it requires certain pressure.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I do have one question, but I'm not sure if you'll know. But at the very end of your presentation, you were kind of talking about how for some of the carnivorous plants, in order to get pollinated, they close up so they can't eat their prey until it's done blooming. So how long would you say a carnivorous plant can go without eating something until it dies?
I'm not 100% sure about that. I think it all depends on A, where it's located, and B, because these plants still do photosynthesize, but they don't do it as much as other plants do because they're not in direct sunlight most of the time, which is why they have evolved to eat their animals. But I'm not 100% sure of how long a plant can go without consuming something.
Okay, thank you.
Would you consider these plants specialists or generalists?
That's a great question. They will they will pretty much eat just about anything. There has been studies that show that certain pitcher plants can consume mammals and amphibians. Most of the time, the underwater ones consume fish. So I think it's very they will eat just about anything that triggers their thing and that they can consume and fit within their trap.
So you would call them generalists?
Yeah, I would probably say so. Any other questions?
Yeah. Hi, Cameron. Great presentation, and thank you for that. But I have a question. You mentioned at the beginning of your presentation that this plant species had evolved these trapping mechanisms through evolution. So does it mean that the ancient species of this plant does not have these trapping mechanisms?
I'm really not sure if we will ever know that or if they do know that because, like I said, Charles Darwin was the first person to discover these plants, and he discovered Venus flytrap, which is what he wrote about in his book. I did not find anything about that article-wise, but it'd be actually really interesting to look up the history of if these have evolved from non-carnivorous plants into these carnivorous plants.
All right, because I was just wondering if it's some kind of adaptation.
No, yeah, that's actually a really good question.
All right, thank you.
Yep. Any others?
Cameron, this is just a nitpicky thing, but if you could, a more appropriate language might be to say that Charles Darwin first described these plants.
Yes,
because I'm thinking
correct.
there's like 30 different types of carnivorous plants just in Florida, and there were people here long before Charles Darwin described Venus flytrap. So, just a thought. But thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
So that was a good reminder because I wasn't even sure that Charles Darwin would have been the first scientist to see one either. Is that what you're saying? Obviously, the indigenous people knew about them in South Carolina, where they're mostly found, at least for the particular one you're talking about. But carnivorous plants are all over the globe, including, like they're in Borneo, for instance, too. But anyhow, was there any other scientists that had described them before him? Even he would be the first scientist, let alone.
They mainly did, the articles I looked at all did reference him as the first one to describe them in a written book, but I'm sure there have been others that might have been before him.
All right. So looks like there was some good discussion there. And do we have any more people, anybody else presenting today?